Good morning. In our second lesson of a series called When to Bend and When to Stand, and it's about compromise. And as I said last week, the word compromise isn't in any of the good English translation, but the concept is everywhere, from Genesis to Exodus, and many of us have been kind of trained to think that compromise is all bad. I want to share with you today that it's neutral, and we looked a little bit at last week and look some more today, some more at it today. But it can be either good or bad, but it will affect your life in a very large way, whichever way you use compromise. So that was our reading right there. And by the way, really grateful that some of you accepted the invitation last Sunday to express your concerns or wanting a better explanation of it. Had two fantastic dialogues with brothers who had concerns or wanted more clarification, and I felt enriched by that, and the fault of not being clear is totally mine. I'm the person up here trying to explain things. Hopefully it'll be more clear even this week, but bless you all, and thank you for being here as we study when to bend and when to stand firm. Just do a little bit of work up here to get things ready. Pen. Hold on. Okay, we're ready to roll now. So I want to look at some, and I mentioned last week that many people just have a negative idea of the word compromise. I wanted to look at a few positive ones in the Bible today, and we're going to see that God himself compromised. And of course, everything he does is righteous. So we'll look at at least one of those today. You can look in your Bible, but I will have a few of the verses up here on the board. And we're going to look at Exodus 33 as we'll begin. And in 32, the Israelites had made a golden calf. And God told them, look, I'm your God, and it's silly to make meaningless idols made by man's hand and then worship them. So he was very upset with them. And in Exodus 33:3, this is God speaking to Moses. And he says, go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, the promised land. Awesome. For I, that word for can be because, for I will not go up in your midst. He'd been traveling with him through the wilderness so far. Now he's saying he won't go because you are an obstinate people and I might destroy you on the way. So if you're going before them with the pillar of the cloud in the daytime, pillar of fire at night, going with them everywhere they go. They followed that column. God told them when to move and when to stay and when to go. So Moses pleads with God. Verses 12 through 16 of this same chapter, he pleads with them, please go with us. God said he would not. So in verse 15, we won't read all of them. Then he, that's Moses, said to him, that's God, if your presence does not go with us, do not lead us from here. Please go with us. And here's God's response. He compromised. Verse 17, the Lord said to Moses, I will also do this thing of which you have spoken. For you have found favor in my sight, you, Moses, have found favor in my sight, and I have known you by name. So we see the power of the prayer of a righteous man. We see God desire to work with his people and bless them, but he listens to Moses because he said, I'm not going to go. And God changed his mind. Both were okay. Whatever God does, it's good. Not going with the Israelites would have been appropriate, but he listened to a righteous man's prayer and acted upon it. And he said, okay, because you have found favor in my sight, Moses, and I've known you by name, God said he would go. Just an example on where God himself is compromised, but not evil, only for good. Verse chapter 32, the same thing. Told Moses, stand aside. Stand aside. I need to destroy these people. And Moses pled with him, please don't do that. I'm paraphrasing. And God said, okay, I won't. But the Lord himself gives us an example of compromising, but never to forsake integrity, truth, goodness, righteousness, never for that. Only for good is how God does it. So we listen to the prayers of his faithful servant Moses, and God changed his mind. He compromised. In Daniel chapter 1, we have another example, a very positive example of compromise, and a negative, well, two examples of compromise. One was a yes and one was a no. Daniel had been carried away to Babylon as a captive, an Israelite captive, probably royalty. And the king Nebuchadnezzar wanted some servants from some of the royal people of Israel. And so they would feed these young men and train them for 3 years, giving just a little bit of background. But these are Gentiles who eat all kinds of things that were unclean in the sight of God. Pork and things that I love like shrimp and lobster and crab. And I don't know if they had those, but those are all unclean. Catfish. I don't know what Daniel's reluctance was. Was it just that he might give them unclean food, or was there a possibility that they would give these captives who were going to serve the king food that had been sacrificed to idols? I don't know. But here's how Daniel reacted. He made up his mind he would not defile himself with the king's choice food, defile himself, or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. First thought, no compromise. I won't eat it. Not going to eat that. That's the standing firm and not bending that we're going to talk about more in the next couple of weeks. No. Whatever happened to me, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when you hear the music play, you better fall down and worship the golden idol image. And they said, okay, we won't do that. Our God can deliver us, but even if he doesn't deliver us, we won't do that. No compromise. Same thing here with Daniel. Awesome. Standing firm. Nope. Not going to go against his love for God, his obedience to his God. But the next thing Daniel did was this. He offered a compromise. He said to the overseer, whom the commander of the officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. These are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These are their Jewish names. But he said to the commander of the overseer over these trainees, verse 12, please, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given some vegetables to eat and water to drink. He's offering a compromise. I'm not going to eat this. I'm not going to drink these things. But please, put us to the test. Just see how it comes out after 10 days. Because the first person he asked, which was the commander, said, no, I might lose my head. So Daniel wasn't done yet. The commander said, no, I'm not gonna allow you not to drink this wine and eat this meat. You'll have to read that for yourself. But then he goes to the overseer. He's not given up. He's still asking for a compromise. Please let us eat the vegetables and just drink water. So there was one issue where he would not compromise at all, stood firm. On the second one, he said, how about this? How about this? This is a godly, righteous form of compromise, offering an option that didn't offend God or go against Daniel's conscience. So anyway, a couple of examples right there. I know that this is kind of new thinking for some people, but there is righteous compromise and unrighteous compromise. So we defined it last week, compromise. Look, this word can be a verb, to compromise, go compromise, I will compromise, or it can be a noun. Where's the compromise here? I'm looking at it as a verb form today. For our series, I'm saying, my words, kind of stolen from some dictionaries, but changed a little bit. To compromise means to give up something you want or something you plan, like God planned, to not go with the Israelites, but to give that up to gain something else. And the idea is if we give one thing up in a compromise, we give one thing up to gain another, the idea is to gain something better. And we'll see that the compromise that God is commanding us to use in the book of Ephesians makes our families much better. There is no possible way to lead, to be involved in a family that's better than Ephesians 5. You'll see it's tough, but it's great. So, last week we talked about some different choices we can make. We said that sometimes we can act like this piece of plastic. We can bend without harm. Hey, honey, I'd like to go to the Tuesday night growth group together because that really appeals to me. And Lisa says, so I say, I want to go this way. And Lisa says, no, I'd rather go to the one on Thursday because I think we need that for our marriage or whatever it is. And so I say, okay. When we compromise righteously, we're open to suggestions, we're open to corrections, we're open to things that aren't sin in God's eyes, so we're flexible. With Daniel, when it came to eating the unclean food, this is compromise. This is an area where we should stand firm. And so the world hits us, right? Hits with temptations and pressure and I want you to work on Sunday mornings and skip services or what, but the word hammers us a lot. I'll bet none of us go a week without being faced with some kind of temptation or the challenge of should I compromise or not. And then the last example I use, so we're flexible sometimes. Sometimes we stand firm. And the last one is my prop here. That plastic bag didn't work last week. The hammer went right through it, as you know, and some glass came out. And thank you, Zayden, where I know you're right there you are, for just volunteering and sweeping it up. So I'm not going to use a plastic bag. I do need a volunteer to hold this. Would somebody... Thank you, Zayden. I should have known. He's an awesome young man. I'm so privileged to be a close friend of his family's. We'll pass on the glass, but you get the idea if you were here last week. It's inflexible. Even if it stands firm, it's inflexible and it's not open to correction, it's not open to improving, not open to getting better, not open to helping other people, and it shatters under certain conditions. And that shattering can affect other people and even shatter us under certain situations. So we won't break it this week. There's a time to be firm. Revelation 2:10 says, be faithful unto death, which means even if it costs your life, don't turn your back on God. In certain realms where the world wants to push you in the wrong way, be unyielding. Don't compromise. Stand firm. Be faithful unto death. Cling to what is good. Never waver. Never compromise with evil. We need to know when to do which. So we looked at these two ideas. There's godly compromise, Sinful compromise. Godly compromise, grounded in truth and integrity, never breaks that. Achieves peace when soul benefits others. Accomplishes God's will. Just the opposite for sinful compromise, right? Sacrifices truth and integrity. Most of us have done that, at least before we were Christians, and we still mess up times after we become. But it sacrifices truth and integrity. Sinful compromise hurts others and ourselves, and it goes against God's will. So we did that, but I want to come up with something. I need something that'll stick with me all the time. So I came up with a little phrase for me. If you like it, use it. But I just came up with give up to gain. So when you compromise, you're giving one thing up always, whether it's for good or bad. And even when a person is involved in sinful compromise, we'll talk about that next week. Even when they're involved in or tempted to compromise sinfully, they're giving up one thing to gain something they think is better, and they're always wrong. It's never better if it's sinful compromise. But anyway, give up to gain is how I'm going to tell myself. Mike, give that up because you'll gain from it. So today, it's faithful compromise in the home or at home. And we'll look at Ephesians, kind of an expository, Ephesians 5:21 through 29. Starting with Ephesians 5:21, it says, and be subject to one another in the fear of Christ, but it doesn't say that. There's look in your book, in your Bible, I don't know which version you have, but you'll see that there's sometimes a space between verse 21 and 22. It's a man-made space, but the translators are saying, we think verse 21 belongs with the preceding verses. Other translators say, no, it belongs after. Well, I know this is small, but if you're a Bible student into Bible skills, hermeneutics, this word and right there is not there. The command is, not in the Greek, which was written in, the command is, be subject to one another in the fear of Christ. That's what it says. And I think it makes a lot more sense, as do other people, smarter than I, that it goes with the preceding, because everything throughout the end of the chapter and into the next chapter is about submission or compromise. It just fits. It fits the theme. It's the umbrella statement. Everything it's going to say after that falls under the umbrella of be subject to one another. Wait a minute. It's going to talk about wives and husbands, children and parents, employers, masters, and employees. But it says be subject to one another. So if this involves children, and it says be subject to one another, is the Holy Spirit telling us that parents are to submit to their children? Because that is exactly what it's saying. Not in an authoritative kind of way where, Dad, I told you to mow the lawn, I told you to mow it yesterday. Submission sometimes can mean submitting to a higher authority. But a lot of times it doesn't. In fact, in most of chapter 5 and part of 6, it's talking about bend, yield, do things with your neighbor, your child, their wife, for their good in mind. So can you think of an example where a righteous parent would ever be subject and submission, exactly the same word in Greek, hupotasso. But it's the same word, be subject to or submit. Is there ever a time when a parent should submit to the children? Lots of times. You parents have done it many times. If a famine ever comes into this land, well, we're destitute for food. Many of you will give up your food for your children. Husbands would give up their food for their wives. That's submission. That's exactly what submission means. You be so concerned for the other person, you act in their best interest. Like love. right? We're motivated by the fear of Christ. But yes, when our children, they need FaceTime. They need quality time with their parents. We give them that time. That's submission. We know what their need is. And so I say, I was tired. I was about to take a nap, but I need to spend time with my daughter. Or, all set to watch the Seahawks, and they're doing pretty good this year. I know there's some people from Colorado, because I've never met you before, but I have you, Michelle. But I don't know if you're a Denver fan, and I don't know how they're doing, but we're Seahawk fans here for the most part. And you're all set to watch it, just like my wife, Lisa, loves watching the Seahawks. And Bobby comes in and says, Daddy, will you play sorry with me? Monopoly, chess, but anyway. Goldfish. Yeah, I'll play sorry with you, honey. The Seahawks can wait. That's submission to one another. And there's lots of examples. I just wanted to kind of give you an overview that it does mean to be subject to or to show submission towards even people that are under your authority. Now, here's a tough one. Let me just see my notes real quickly. We do this all out of motivation, respect for Christ. I think I mentioned that. Wives and husbands, I've mentioned all these categories. We answered that question. Now the tough stuff. I understand that if you're not convinced the Bible is inspired by the Creator, that you might reject this or question it. I get that. I did too. So anyway, it talks to wives first. And it says, wives, be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord. Now there's an example of authority. Be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ also is the head of the church, he himself being the Savior of the body. But as the church is subject to Christ, so also the wives ought to be to their husbands in everything. Non-Bible believers are going to reject this. So one of the best things a person can do is invest in your soul if you have one. You may not know. But isn't 5, 10, 15 hours investment worth the possibility of saving your soul if you have one, if there is a God, if the Bible is inspired? Many people reject this, but I'd love to study with them. The evidence is so strong for God. Anyway, moving on to the wives. So, our society since the 70s has hated this idea that wives should be subject to their own husbands. Well, let's look at a couple of factors. Statistically, 50% of the women in here are smarter than their husbands. My wife says it's about 90%. I made that up. She's never said that. But half of you or more are smarter than your spouse. It has nothing to do with intelligence. What about value? What about your individual value? If you are subject to your own husband, are you somehow devalued? Well, let's look at an example. A mayor and a policeman. Who has, in the same town, who has more authority? The mayor does. In fact, in December of 2024, the mayor of Seattle fired the chief police. They have more authority. But guess what? If the mayor of Seattle is driving through Seattle, and he comes to a place where the traffic lights are out, and there's a policeman signaling the traffic, and if I did it, they'd crash. But if there's a policeman, that mayor who has authority over that policeman better obey the law. They better submit to this person that is under their authority, but performing something for the safety of all. And so even a mayor, though they have more authority, doesn't make them more important, more valuable than a police officer or a high school student. And the same with Christian women that are married to a believer, you're not less important. In Galatians 3:28, this says there's neither Jew nor Greek. Are there Jews in the world? Yeah, there are Jews in the world. What does that mean? Are there Gentiles, is another translation for that word? Are there Jews and Gentiles? Of course they are. What does it say? Why does it say there are not? Because this is in the eyes of God himself. He doesn't care. You're precious to him whether you're an Israelite or a Gentile. There is neither slave nor free man. Oh, one has a lot more authority than the other one. There's still slavery in the world today even. In God's sight, no. Precious souls, neither male nor female. That has nothing to do with value. But God chose to have a leader in each home, and he chose the males in this case. He talks about it from in Genesis on. Some people don't like that. Either there is a God who knows what he's doing for our good, or there's not a God. Most of us here know that there is a God. So even if this is hard for us, and this is very hard, a woman, a wife, a Christian wife, has to be submissive to her Christian husband. But sometimes he's stupid. Sometimes he makes mistakes. Sometimes he's just flat out wrong. Sometimes he's selfish. Hopefully not very often. Well, wait till you see how hard the man has it. Because in my opinion, it's the hardest verse in the entire Bible, for me anyway. But this is talking to women, and it says, you submit to your husband. In verse 25, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church. How much did he love the church? And gave himself up for her. I fail at that all the time. I do think it's the hardest verse in the entire Bible for me, anyway. Wives, be subject to your husbands. You follow their lead. Now, in a good relationship, they'll talk, they'll compromise. And with the brilliance of the woman and the openness of the man who's open to being subject to one another, verse 21, who's open to the best solution, they'll come up with good solutions. But here it says, you love your wife so much that your life is wrapped around hers. And you give yourself up for her. Wow. It's calling for the complete sacrifice of the husband. 1 Peter 3:7 also demands compromise. This is a different book of the New Testament. 1 Peter 3:7 says, you husbands, in the same way as given instruction to the wives in the previous 6 verses. And he says, you husbands, in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way, as someone weaker, since she is a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. So a couple of quick thoughts here. 1 Peter 7, to the husband, demands compromise. It demands subjection. Number one, when it says, live with your wives in an understanding way, you know what that means? Very hard. Very challenging, I should say. But it says, you live with your wives in an understanding way. Number one, you got to take the time to learn your wife, to understand her. And that ain't easy. Ask any man in here that's married. But you put the time in, you invest the time into your wife, because she may not be the same as Sarah or Sue or anybody else. And so you learn your wife and you love your wife and you live with her in an understanding way which calls for compromise. Here's your idea, but here's the needs of your wife. She needs FaceTime. You know, Dr. Gary Smalley quotes some research done, and he says that men speak, the average man speaks about 10,000 words a day. 10,000 words a day for the average man. The average woman, some of you know this, right? The average woman, 25,000 words a day. More than twice as much as a man does. God designed our wives, most of them are right brain, 80%. They have a need to connect. They have a relational need. They need FaceTime. They need quality conversation. And so even if you're not that way, God says, you live with an understanding wife. In fact, after 12 years of marriage, twice, Lisa, we were living in Linwood, and Lisa says, honey, she said, can we talk? I said, well, sure. About what? Goes, no. It's not about, I just want to talk. And I'm going, what? How do you have a conversation without a goal behind it? Well, there's a goal behind it, but I didn't get it. How do you have a conversation without some subject matter that you're discussing? So she asked me again, I don't know when, later. Honey, can we talk? Well, of course we can. About what? No, I just want to talk. They want that relational time. And a man that understands his wife, maybe there's some exceptions, great. Give her some quiet time if she needs it. But the understanding man, he makes sure, and I'm not good enough at it, but he makes sure that he fills his wife's bucket. So he gives her the face time that she needs. And the consequences of doing that or not doing that are significant. Do this so that your prayers will not be hindered. In other words, if I don't live with my wife in an understanding way, God doesn't listen to my prayers. That's a big deal. Shellen, that's how important it is for you to live with your wife. And besides that, you're not superior to her, mister. When we live with an understanding way, show her honor as a fellow heir, an equal. Not equal in authority. God made that clear. In the business world, by the way, I bought a book because I had a partner, and it's called The Partnership Book, and written by a lawyer who'd worked with a lot of partnerships. And he said, big book, but he said, don't ever get in a partnership. They don't work, at least very often. God in his wisdom said, I'm going to put one as the one that's the most accountable. And so we men are held accountable for what goes on in the family. So I was a bozo, maybe still am, but I'm better. We want to know what challenges a wife has. She's our equal. Authority is the exception where we are more accountable to God than she is, but we're going to treat her as an equal, as God tells us to, as a fellow heir. Now, one last thing before we move on. Talking about compromise, and both of these demand giving something up. Jesus gave himself up for the church. Husbands, we give ourselves up. That's scary to me. Just to say it's scary. But husbands, we're to give ourselves up for our wife. That's compromise. Giving something up to gain something greater. A joyful, peaceful, robust, healthy, happy marriage. So verse 25 demands that in Ephesians, but also it demands compromise in 1 Peter 3:7. You learn your wife. You spend quality time with her. You treat her as a fellow heir. You give up using your authority very often. Most of the time, if we have a good marriage, I rarely pull out my trump card. Maybe I shouldn't use that term, that's political, but I rarely use the power that God has given me because they don't need to. Gentlemen, if my wife, and she has more than once, wants to paint the walls a weird color, in my opinion, go for it, honey. And she has. Our bedroom, lavender once. No, that was the first time. I said, no, I won't compromise, and I did. I said, okay, I can live with that. My best friends see the lavender walls. So what? Then she painted some unusual colors in the downstairs rooms. And you know what? Happy wife, happy life. You've heard that. Happy wife, happy life. I don't even ask her, and she doesn't even have to ask me. And she knows this. You want to paint something? You go for it, honey. Because it doesn't matter. I can give up my personal preference to honor my wife because that's her castle. That's her realm. Great. Be happy. And so there are a few times when I will exert my authority if needed. One of them is safety. I have had to I've had to exert my authority when it comes to safety. I sold ladders for 18 years. There's 200,000 falling accidents a year. Lost time is 10 weeks, 5,000 deaths. And I said, honey, I'm laying down the law. I don't want you standing on a chair because a lot of them are chair accidents. I'm not going to compromise on that. I know too much. Safety of the kids, although they're grown now. Finances, well, I'm held accountable for that by God as the head of my home. So we're going to have a dialogue on that. What's the best way to do it? So there are a few times, but I don't even exert. I mean, you can correct me after service, and not out loud right now. That'd be embarrassing. But I don't think I use my God-given authority once a year when we disagree. I don't even think it's that much. So I'm suggesting this, that you develop, and many of you have great marriages, but when that disagreement comes, then does it matter? Good question. Is it a spiritual issue? Because that's another place where I will, if we disagree on something important, that I will say, well, here's the way our family's going to do that. Now, she's still free will. By the way, did I say this? Because I didn't. Submission is always voluntary. Always a choice. You don't have to submit to the law, even though Romans 13:1 commands you to. You don't have to. Pay some consequences. But submission is always voluntary. So, early in our marriage, I say, I'm the husband, and I want you to do this, or you're in sin. I said something like that. Been a while. That's not submission. That's coercion, forcing. But subjection is voluntary from the heart. I will do that even though I don't want to because he's my God-given husband or whatever. But subjection always is voluntary. Moving on to the children. Children. And that would be many of you. Everly, Cyrus. You know, you're as big as adults now, but I mean, since you're still teens, I would say you qualify as a child. And children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise. Now, this is Old Testament, but God put it in the New Testament, so we're under it. And you know, Tricia, you are your mom's child. Now, I'm not sure this applies to you as much, but I think it applies to even me. My mom is here today. I'm blessed by that. As old as I am, I'm her child. I'm still to honor her. But you younger ones, Landon and everybody in here, there's two benefits when you obey your parents. Number one, your life will be better. Switch into yellow. It will be well with you, it says. You will have a better life if you respect your parents. And number two, you'll live longer. Exception, sure. God lets young people, he takes them to heaven sometime, but this is the general rule. 1,000 young people obey their parents are going to live longer and happier than 1,000 young people that don't. So we won't spend a lot of time on that. Our audience, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 young people. Besides that, that's all I have to say. But now fathers. I mentioned this, I don't know if it's in class or in a sermon, but see this word right here? That's pateros. The Greek word is pateros, and it's parents. Remember when Jesus stayed in Jerusalem, Luke chapter 2, and his parents left for home? That's this word. It means parents. Now, sometimes context, if there's a group of fathers meeting to learn how to be better fathers, you'd use the same word, pateros, but it's the word used when it means a father and a mother. It's not just talking to the dad. That's why mothers aren't mentioned later on, because this includes mothers and fathers. And it says this, do not provoke your children to anger. Come on. You know, however that might be done, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So I want to say a couple things, getting nearer the end. Submission or compromise, they're not equal, but they're very similar. Compromise means to give up to gain. Submission means you consider the other person more important than yourself so that you give things up for their good. Very, very similar. God is telling us, as parents, to be concerned about how we come across. Now, my dad was a disciplinarian. I took on some of that myself, and I just didn't talk back to my dad. Mike, you do this. I might say, right now, or can I finish my homework? But didn't talk back to him. Disciplinarian. But he didn't belittle us. Most of the time, he didn't provoke us. There was one occasion. But I mean, he was a great dad. I'm so blessed and a better father than I. But use wisdom. If there's more than one approach to get a child to do something, use the good one. Use the one that doesn't upset them, that doesn't dishonor them. Don't provoke your children. Give up making quick emotional decisions. My wife's dad, her parents were incredible. But she told me when she was young that her dad, she'd say, hey, Dad, can I? No. He wouldn't even let her get the question out. So she'd go to her room and cry, and he'd come in and say, I'm sorry, yes, you can do it. But the point is that was provocative. That was provoking her. He would say no before the question was finished. And look, do not provoke your children. If you're the best dad in the world, who is, I can't see the dads right now, but, Jeff's back there. If you're a great dad, and you make every single decision and every single instruction to your children, it's the best it can be, will they ever be provoked? Of course they will. Kids don't like our decisions. They don't have the wisdom we do. Of course they're going to be upset sometimes. But the idea is we go out of our way to treat them with love and respect, and not to get them all worked up. And then another verse that's very similar is in Colossians 3:21. Do not exasperate your children. Don't cause them to lose hope. Like it's so easy, and I am guilty of it with my wife even. But when we were first married, perfectionist. You know, not a bad job, but you could have painted the corners just a little bit better. Well, if we do that with our children on everything they do, they will lose heart. If they can never get anything right, they will be exasperated and they will lose heart. And so an idea is just to find the good. Look at the effort they put into it and praise them for the things that they did that are right. But it's possible to provoke and exasperate them. So praise what you can. Instruct them if the timing is right. But give up heavy-handed leadership, my way or the highway. If you do that, the consequences will be severe. All right. We're going to circle back to our beginning verse. The instruction is to Christians, be subject to one another. Compromise. Be open to correction. You know, a non-compromising spouse or person is not open to correction. They're not open to opinion. They have their way, and that's good enough for them. God's saying, no, you want a robust family that is full of joy, that is Christ-centered, respects each other, enjoys spending time together, going on vacation together, then we want to follow this rule. To be subject to one another. Husbands to the wives, wives to the husbands. Parents to the children, children to the parents. It's God's way, and following this methodology of compromise or subjection, it works. That's all I have today. Thank you so much. We are going to offer the invitation if anyone needs the prayers of the congregation or would like to be baptized into Jesus today in the water. Then we welcome you to come forward while we stand right now and sing the song of invitation.